Welcome to Japanese History for Everyone. I'm Lucidity, and today is the first of 3 videos that will be going over the history of the samurai and how they went from warriors hired by the nobility to becoming the ruling class of Japan for over half a millennia. First, the Nara Period. Throughout Japanese history, the samurai were known by the term bushi. The first use of this term is in the Nara period during Taika Reform, a period where Japan modeled itself based on China's Tang dynasty. It's during the Taika Reform that part of the Taiho Code of 702 AD stipulated that every 1 in 3 to 4 men were to be drafted into the national military, Japan's first attempt at forming such a military. These men were to provide their own weapons, but in exchange they were accepted from taxes. There were 12 ranks, and everyone's 6th rank and below were known as samurai. This is where the term is first coined. However, the samurai during this period are public servants, and their positions were not hereditary. Overall, this military system was short-lived. The Heian Period. During the 8th and 9th century, Emperor Kanmu organized military campaigns against the native Emishi tribes in the northeastern region of Japan, who were resisting subjugation. He brings together warriors from each of the major tribes and sends them off to fight against the Emishi tribes, over time expanding their duties to quelling rebellions and maintaining order across Japan. It's also at this time that the term shogun is first coined. At this time, the shogun was not the leader of Japan, but the leader of these military units. This army would also be short-lived, eventually becoming disbanded. The later Heian Period. This is where we truly start to see the beginnings of what we now know as the samurai. At first, samurai were hired warriors that defended the interests of the Heian nobility. These warriors came from leading members of the most powerful clans in Japan, including the rivaling Taira and Minamoto clans, who were descendants of the emperors. Over time, these samurai gained in numbers, resources, and power. They further strengthened this power by developing alliances. After a series of conflicts, the Taira clan ultimately set up the first samurai-led government and relegated the emperor to the position of a figurehead. The Taira was then overtaken by the Minamoto clan, who established the Kamakura Period. We'll talk about this more in an upcoming video. The Kamakura Period. The Kamakura Period is where we first start to see the formation of the daimyo system. A daimyo is closely comparable to a medieval European lord. During this period, samurai men were sent to different towns across Japan to become magistrates, holding political power in fixed 4-year terms. Ultimately, they refused to give up their power once they reached the end of those 4-year terms, and instead passed down both their land and their power to their children, making the title of samurai something that was now inheritable. The Kamakura period is also the period where Japanese swordsmithing is developed, and it's in this period that you get the imagery of samurai with their swords at their side. Masamune perfected this technique in the 14th century, and the katana became world-renowned. Prior to this period, samurai were mostly horse riders that used bow and arrows rather than swords. The Sengoku Period. The Sengoku, or Warring States period, is a time of civil war across Japan. So naturally, many people who weren't previously samurai were able to become samurai by being trained and earning the title. By the end of the war, those who had supported the winners, Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa, were able to keep their status as samurai. The Tokugawa, or Edo Period. The Tokugawa period establishes the samurai as a social class within the 4-tiered class system. This caste system separates powers as follows. At the top is the emperor, a symbolic figurehead. Below him, the shogun, the true leader of Japan. Below the shogun is the daimyo, lords and rulers of the different regions that make up Japan. At this time, there's about 260 daimyo, each with their own army of samurai. Below the daimyo is the samurai, who are bound by a code of loyalty to their daimyo and expected to protect the daimyo's land. Samurai make up anywhere between 5 to 10% of the population. There's also a subclass of masterless samurai called ronin, who eventually become a social problem when financial difficulties cause many daimyo to have to cut down their armies. Below the daimyo are peasants, farmers and fishermen that make up 90% of Japan. Below the peasants are artisans, and below them merchants. Below them are a shunned class known as the barakumin, or untouchables, that deal with things associated with death, such as butchering meat. The shogun and daimyo and samurai are all in the highest strata of the social system. So what did it mean to be at the top of the social classes? Well, when a samurai passed by a lower class, that person was required to bow and show respect. If a farmer, merchant, or artisan refused to bow to the samurai was legally entitled to chop off that person's head. Yikes. As the Tokugawa period was a period of peace and stability, samurai had to redefine their identities. Swords became more symbolic than practical, and the bushido, or the samurai code of ethics, became central to the samurai's identity. In the 16th century, Confucianism spread across Japan, and the educated samurai class became students of Confucius and Mencius, imparting Confucius values into their own. Over time, samurai increasingly became bureaucrats, administrators, and scholars, rather than warriors. The Meiji Period. In 1867, the shogun stepped down, and in 1868, the emperor of Japan was restored to power. power, forming the new Meiji government. In 1871, the caste system was abolished, as was the social class of samurai. However, even though the samurai were no longer a social class or in a position of power, as the most educated class, they became major players in the new Japan. Many samurai had already embraced their new roles as political and educational leaders, and today many members of the Diet, Japan's modern government, can trace their lineage back to their samurai ancestors. So that's it for today. Stay tuned, because in the next couple of weeks I will be doing a two-part video of how the samurai were able to overtake the emperor and establish a samurai-led government under the shogun. Be sure to like and subscribe, and if you're interested, I'm also posting a couple of videos about my experience living in Osaka 10 years ago as a study abroad student. If you have any questions, please ask them below. I am answering any and all questions, and I'll see you next week.